Hi everyone, welcome to this CitiesSHIFT webinar, Improving Urban Air Quality Through Ecomobility, Global Overview and Practical Solutions. My name is Zhang Yiqian, and I am the Sustainable Urban Mobility Officer at ICLE World Secretariat based in Bonn, Germany. First of all, a very warm welcome to all of you for joining us today. We hope the next 1.5 hours will be a very interesting introduction into best practices from the US, Europe, and Asia to improve air quality and also discuss examples of mobility solutions, how they impact air quality, and also potential trade-offs. So this webinar is organized by the Sustainable Urban Mobility team at ICLE. So our team works with policymakers to raise awareness and aiming to provide sustainable mobility for all through policies, planning, and implementation. And this webinar is held as part of the Healthy Urban Living Working Group of the CitiesSHIFT project, which aims to support 6 project cities in China, India, and Uganda to identify challenges and opportunities of urban mobility system using the ecomobility shift tool. So the ecomobility shift is a methodology to self-assess cities' mobility performance, analyze performance, and act to improve and establish a path of continuous improvement. Cities that have undertaken the ecomobility shift assessment have all found it useful, and they are eager to learn practical solutions to address climate change and air quality issues. That's why this webinar is being held. So today, data from the World Health Organization shows that 9 out of 10 people worldwide breathe polluted air. It is also estimated that outdoor air pollution in both cities and rural areas caused 4.2 million premature deaths worldwide in 2016. And the transportation emissions are a major source of air pollution, which is among the leading factors in respiratory illness and also premature deaths. And also studies find out transportation tailpipe emissions contributed to 11% of global mortality from ambient particulate matter and also ozone exposure in 2010 and also 11.4% in 2015. So without major changes in urban development, investment, and policy, transport emissions are projected to skyrocket. And that's why a paradigm shift is needed to redefine mobility and also go beyond merely providing transport by focusing on residents' quality of life. And so what is ecomobility? Ecomobility is a term coined by ICLE, which gives priority to walking, cycling, public transport, shared, and light electric vehicles. The aim is to reduce dependence on private vehicles, and more importantly, it needs to be provided in an integrated and a connected manner. So just a general housekeeping rule, this webinar will be recorded, and we will make the recording available for those that would like to refer to it afterwards on the ecomobility website, as well as in the follow-up email that we are going to send out a couple days after. And in terms of today's lineup, we have 3 diverse speakers representing city official in the USA, an urban and transport planner in London, and also an institutional expert specialized in improving clean air in Asia. So our first speaker will be Prarthana Borah, the Indian Director of Clean Air Asia, and who is going to present a clean air action plan and also integrated air quality management with a special focus on how to reduce vehicle emissions. And the second speaker will be Garrett Wong, who is the Senior Sustainable Analyst at the City of Santa Monica. And he will look into mobility and also sustainability in Santa Monica. And our third speaker is Camilla Ween, the Director of Goldstein Ween Architects and also past President of Women in Transport. So Camilla will also present some sustainable mobility solutions today. So, and after the speakers will allocate some time for questions and the answers, we would like to also ask you to type your questions in the chat box of the webinar platform. And please keep the questions short to the point, and also put in the name of the speaker that you would like to address the question to. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Prarthana. Prarthana is the India Director of Clean Air Asia, and she's been working with cities to support the implementation of action plans and also communication and capacity buildings for better air quality. And she supervised the strategy of assessment of air quality management profiles of 30 Indian cities and has been responsible for conceptualizing policy support and capacity building programs. So Prarthana, thanks for joining us. Over to you.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Prarthana and I look after the India operations of Clean Air Asia. So Clean Air Asia is an international NGO based out of the Philippines. We are headquartered in the Philippines. We work in about 8 Asian countries, about 1,000+ Asian cities, basically to reduce air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from transport, energy, and other sectors. We work in 3 areas. We work in air quality and climate change. We work in sustainable urban transportation and lower emissions urban development. Our primarily, our larger work is with cities. So I'm going to approach the presentation, the talk today, basically talking about our policy support work in terms of how we are supporting cities to improve air quality management and advance better air quality, with an emphasis on mobility planning, and bring in some challenges as well as learnings in terms of how we've managed to integrate mobility planning as part of our clean air action plans in cities. So why are we talking about air quality? I think let me just start with the research that we did in 465 Asian cities, and if you can see in the slide, 99% of the cities have unhealthy air, and this is Asian cities that we are talking about, of which 406 were developing Asian cities and 32 were developed Asian cities. And if you look at the slide carefully, you can see that 99% of the cities have unhealthy. They do not meet the WHO standards for air quality, and only 35 actually meet the WHO interim standards, which is a standard that has been set because we are aware that we would not be able to reach the main standard that has been set by the WHO. So I think air quality is a major problem in Asia, and it is a developing country, developing city issue, and all these cities have similar problems: a high energy demand, rising transportation, and major population growth. So there are 3 sections to my presentations. I'm going to talk about assessment of mobility planning, how we need data if we want to talk about clean air action. Then I'm going to talk about what is clean air action, and then we go into 2 case studies where we have tried to integrate mobility in policy and public engagement for achieving better air quality. So let's start with the assessment part, and I'm just going to go through a couple of tools that we can use in order to understand the transport situation in a city. So the first is the Clean Air Scorecard tool, which is a tool that has been developed by Clean Air Asia. It helps to assess the status of air quality management in the city, which is very important because it gives you a baseline in terms of where you need to start. So this has 3 indices: the air pollution and health index, which talks about what the air pollution levels are within the city in terms of the pollutants, what are the key pollutants, and what is actually the air quality index. The second is the Clean Air Management Capacity Index, which talks about what is the capacity of the city in terms of monitoring? Is there enough data? Is there enough information in terms of emissions inventories and studies that can tell you about what are the key pollutants, where are the key pollutants coming from, and also talks about health impact assessments that are available. What is the data that is available vis-a-vis air pollution and health? And the third index is on clean air policies and actions. Now, the reason why I'm showing this slide is that it is very important to look at baseline when we are assessing air quality or looking at air quality management policies, because you can look at it from a transport perspective, because when you use the tool, we also assess what are the transport studies available, what is the data on transport available, what are the major pollutants, or have there been emissions inventories that have been done in terms of transport emissions? And similarly, under the policy index, you look at within the city, what are the transport policies, what are the transport programs? So if you start with the Clean Air Scorecard tool, you have a baseline for a city and you know where your key intervention points would be. The second tool that we have is the team tool, which gives you, it's an Excel-based tool, and it can be used to evaluate GHG and air pollution impact of transport projects. So team can be used to evaluate BRT, bicycle, pedestrian, and MRT projects, and helps to identify elements in project design that can spur ridership. It can, what can boost travel speed, what can cut emissions. In fact, using team and vision forecasting approach, what we did was we forecasted transport emissions from 2005 to 2050 for 6 ASEAN countries, and we have prepared avoid, shift, improve policies for these countries which are being implemented. So, these are two types of tool. One kind of gives you an overall picture in terms of where the city stands as far as transport policy is concerned, and the second gives you a perspective on what are some of the transport projects. Are they reducing emissions? Do you need to look at it from a different perspective, or if they're good, can we scale them up? We also have a Cities Act website, which can be used by cities, which basically you can input your data, and then you have information in terms of where you stand as far as your emissions from transport is concerned. So cities who have voluntarily feed in, so we have 250 cities which have fed into this website, and it's an online platform that gives you information on air quality, air pollutants, and what are the air pollution levels, as well as transport related emissions and energy emissions. So these are 3 tools that can be used before we go into any intervention in air quality management policy, and will help us get a baseline as far as cities are concerned. So the second part of the presentation is on what is a clean air action plan. What do we understand by the clean air action plan? Before we go into a clean air action plan, let me first explain about the context of the plan. The theoretical context is that when we talk about the plan, we cannot address only one aspect. So Clean Air Asia developed the guidance framework, which is basically 6 guidance areas, and these are the areas that you see on the slide that, where you need information, you need research, and you need action on if you want to have a proper air quality management system within a city. So it's not about just having data or just having an emissions inventory, but it's about information in terms of data, as well as what are the key major pollutants, where is it coming from, but we also need to know the correlation with health, and how do you communicate to this public. I think one of the areas that is mostly neglected is the area of communication, and all these 4 areas need to be integrated within a clean air action plan, supported by a good governance system which helps to bring these areas together and achieve better air through proper management and proper tracking and monitoring. So when you talk about the Clean Air Action Plan, what is it? It is cost-effective strategies that help to reduce emissions. And this is very important to understand. It's not just about just having strategies, but it is important to track this from the perspective of emissions reduction. How you need to comply with standards. Most countries have standards, but the compliance is where the challenge is, especially in Asian cities. How do you enforce and how do you ensure compliance? That is where you need instruments that help you comply and adopt control mechanisms. And who is involved? I mean, this all correlates whenever you talk about air quality or transport. I think you need the government, you need stakeholders, and you need public participation. And that is where the Clean Air Action Plan is successful. So let's go to the first example. This is a Clean Air Action Plan that we prepared for Kanto in Vietnam, and this is where it stands. The reason why I am showing this is that this is a very specific plan which has evolved over a year. And initially, I'm going to show you a basic plan which we have just developed for India a little later, but this, as you can see, has very set targets. Like, for instance, if we look at point 1, it's about setting up a vehicle inspection task force consisting of representatives from this and that. So it specifies exactly how the task force is going to be set up. It specifies how long it is going to take, what are the indicators, and also allots financial resources. So this is a good air action plan that can be implemented, but this doesn't happen overnight, because when you're making a theoretical plan, especially in the context of vehicular emissions, you need to involve the transport department and engage the transport department so that they can participate in the whole process of preparation of the plan, as well as set their own targets. Because the issue is, in most of these Asian cities, the transport is a mitigation mechanism for clean air, but usually air is only considered as a regulatory aspect. Only the regulatory aspects are considered in terms of monitoring and studies. So when it comes to the mitigation mechanisms, I think it's very important to include the transport and road departments, so that if you want to achieve, proper action. So these are some of the areas, and very detailed as far as vehicular emissions are concerned, that Kanto has taken responsibility. And this is as of May 2017, where they have begun working in these areas to achieve targets. We are tracking the progress, but the results will be available in the next couple of months in terms of whether they have achieved, better air quality or not. The second air action plan, where we have actually done some kind of a tracking mechanism and monitoring mechanism, is in Bogor city in Indonesia, where if you look at the target, it was to reduce emissions from transportation sector by improving public transportation. So, in 2017, we did our baseline, and if you can see in the last column, there has been a reduction in emissions as far as compared to the baseline year, basically because there has been a focus on public transportation, increase in the number of buses, and policies and strategies to move people from private transport to public transportation. However, there's also a negative in terms of the highways. There is as far whatever the air quality standards were supposed to be passed, which was actually mentioned in the plan, has not been implemented so far. So there's a plus side, and there's a the flip side. Sorry, the slide is not moving. I'm sorry, there's a bit of a problem with the slide. Okay, I'm just, yeah. So so this is a very basic air action plan which has just been prepared. India just announced the National Clean Air Program about 6 months back, and cities were asked to submit air action plans. So if you look at it from the perspective of reducing vehicular emissions, there are 3 components that are being talked about here: a public awareness and enforcement component, there's an infrastructure component, and there's a clean non-motorized transport component. So if you compare it to the Cleaner Action Plan that I showed you first from Vietnam, that was much detailed plan, and this is a basic plan. So we start with a basic document like this, and which becomes a document like what you saw earlier, because there is an entire consultative process which looks at each of these points in terms of bringing together different stakeholders and looking at targets that you can set, as well as putting financial resource allocation and a strategy to achieve these points that have been put forward. And as you can see, there are these are very much related to achieving clean mobility in terms of improving public awareness. There are infrastructure interventions like building an expressway, or better traffic management, construction of cycle paths, and also there is this whole issue of emphasis on non-motorized transport and cycling, as well as improving public transport systems. So finally, let me go to the third part of my presentation, which is basically 2 case studies that we have been successful in terms of achieving better air quality in cities in Asia. So first is on behavioral change. So eco-driving is something that Cleaner Asia is working very, very intensively in several projects. Why eco-driving? Because eco-driving promotes safety. It has environmental advantages in terms of reduction of GHG emissions, as well as air pollution reduction. And of course, financially, eco-driving leads to fuel savings and lower vehicle maintenance costs. And interestingly, it also has a social benefit of reducing stress for both drivers and passengers. So these are some of the programs that we are doing as far as eco-driving is concerned. The first one is the 1M Blue program, which is basically an advocacy program which is going to reach 1 million Filipino drivers. It includes driver training. The second one is very focused on tricycle drivers and talks about engine maintenance and increasing, which can lead to increased fuel savings. We also have clean fleet management programs, which are focused particularly on corporate sector, because who run these fleets. So it includes actually it's very focused on reduction of and savings of fuels. So the training emphasizes, and there's a pre and a post assessment, so that they can see the fact that how much fuel has been saved and what is the cost saved to the organization. The Jakarta eco driving experience that we have is one of our best, our most successful experiences, which is a 5-year project, and we've just extended it to about 4 cities, where it includes developing our training toolkit consultatively, followed by trainings and capacity building programs of drivers. And in the second phase, we're looking at institutionalizing the process and including it in the whole process of the driving license policy. And of course, other than that, we have also looked at eco-driving from sharing of experience perspective in China, where Germany and the China experiences of eco-driving have been merged to look at how you could look at behavioral change as part of the whole clean air action planning process, especially emphasizing on eco-driving, so that clean mobility is supported by behavior that reduces the emissions due to excess fuel or bad driving habits. The second case that I would like to talk about briefly is the Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework, which is collaboratively done with ECLAE, Cleaner Asia, GIZ, and the National Institute of Urban Affairs. This is interesting because we have tried to integrate mobility planning into the Indian Smart City Framework, which is about 43 smart cities, where we are looking at indicators for clean mobility as well as indicators for clean air, and the cities have to now report on these and set their targets based on the indicators that we have prepared, so that they can reach a particular, to reach a particular standard. So these are some of the clean mobility indicators. The first is low carbon mobility, and the idea is that a city has to have a mobility plan, and the benchmark is that they would have to implement 50% of the projects which are basically which are basically related to low carbon mobility. The second indicator is on low carbon buses. What is the fleet? What is the change in the fleet? And the benchmark would be that 50% of the total public transport fleet should be green fleet. The third indicator is on public transport ridership, where we are looking at how the percentage increase of total public transport would increase, and under the smart cities system, and basically you benchmark that you would have 100% public transport ridership. This we are actually connecting with the clean air indicators. So we have the mobility indicators which go side by side with the clean air indicators. So while you have a mobility plan, you also need to have a clean air action plan where you're going to basically do impact assessment of the mobility projects with clean air by assessing, by sensor-based monitoring and measuring the air quality at the baseline and then after the implementation of the project. So these are the two air quality indicators which have been merged. So the smart cities basically need to report on the mobility indicators as well as the air quality indicators. So the entire process of mobility solutions, and this is my summary slide, which is basically the entire process of mobility solutions for the air action plans is looking at three aspects. One is the assessment, which is basically availability of information for estimation of vehicular emissions, processes for estimating vehicular emissions, capacity for estimating vehicular pollutions, and also the results of impact assessments. So this is the first portion that needs to be available if you want a clean air action plan that is implementable and successful. When you look at planning, which basically looks at developing short, mid-term targets, aligning mobility assessment planning with cities, multi-stakeholder participation, allocation of financial resources, and finally the implementation, which is basically strengthening management processes, institutional arrangements, capacity, technical processes, and also adapting impact assessments. So this is the process of mobility planning within an air action plan, which would help us achieve clean air, especially in terms of reducing vehicular emissions.
Okay, thank you very much, Prarthana. And indeed, there's so much going on in the space. And as you mentioned, it is also very important to address air quality issues as a cross-cutting aspect of development. And also, we need to go beyond air pollution mitigation to a more holistic approach. And as you highlighted here, communication with the stakeholders and also appropriate training is critical for better air quality. So I here have a question for you. I'm wondering, so you have got a lot of experience working with Asian cities and like India, China, and Philippines and Vietnam. And I wonder what's the key challenge like in addressing the air quality issues there, like in working with the cities?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think one of the major challenges with air quality is that air is just not about air, and it's much more than air. So if you look at the mitigation aspects, I think the integration is very, very important, because whether you look at if you look at all the sources, I mean, when you're talking about emissions from power, thermal power, it is an energy issue. If you're looking at vehicular emissions, it's a transport issue. If you're looking at road dust and construction dust, it is again housing and building issues. So I think one of the biggest challenges in Asian countries is that pollution, air pollution is still considered sectoral while it should be intersectoral, and there's a need to mainstream it. So I think it is important. One of the ways in which we are experimenting and we are trying to approach is to look at it from rather as an urban development issue, besides being an environmental issue. So I think integration and how do you integrate these different departments in terms of solutions is one of the biggest challenges, bringing people together. And because if you can get all these departments and all these different sectors together, then what we could achieve is also financial resources, because air quality management also does require finances, huge finances. So it's important to pool in and not just look at it from an environmental point of view.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Prarthana. And here I will say, if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to address them in the chat box and mention who this question should be addressed to. And then we would like to move on to our next speaker, Garrett Wong. Garrett leads policy and projects in climate action, adaptation planning, energy efficiency, and renewable energy, and also electric vehicle charging. He is responsible for the implementation of Santa Monica's recently adopted climate action and also adaptation plan and electric vehicle action plan. So the floor is yours, Garrett.
Great.
Hello?
Thank you, Chan. So I'm going to have to update my own profile, as I'm actually no longer with the City of Santa Monica. I am now the Climate Program Manager for the County of Santa Barbara, which is just north of the Santa Monica area. I've been with the City of Santa Monica for over 7 years, and as Yi-Chin had mentioned, I have been leading and implementing many of the city's policies and programs that have both reduced carbon emissions as well as improved the local air quality. So I'm going to be speaking to that work and the work that is still ongoing in Santa Monica. I have permission from both the city as well as the County of Santa Barbara to present on behalf of the City of Santa Monica. So I'm just a few days out of actually of my tenure there. So just to give a little bit of an orientation for those who are not familiar, the City of Santa Monica is one of 88 cities in all of Los Angeles County. LA County is a very large area, and it is, the City of Santa Monica is surrounded actually by the city of Los Angeles on all three sides, and then the Pacific Ocean is on the west side of the city. Our population is small. We're just over 92,000 people, but that population can increase well into the 300,000, particularly during the summertime. Santa Monica is a popular tourist destination, both internationally and locally. We have major industries, primarily in the entertainment, technology, and retail sectors. And so we do see a lot of growth and development in Santa Monica. All of it is infill, but we are still grappling with the intensity in terms of demand for jobs, demand for housing, and the mobility issues that follow along. So some of you may have been to Santa Monica, and for those who haven't, this is a glimpse of what Santa Monica is like. We have our famous Santa Monica Pier up to the left. It's 100% solar powered and features LED lights. We have a robust local farmers market program where we source some of the best produce in California. We have a thriving local arts community in which we have lots of local art and local murals. And we also have a fairly active community in terms of biking and walking. Santa Monica is fairly dense in terms of its urban planning, and it makes for a relatively easy way to get around for local trips. That said, Santa Monica, as I mentioned, is also surrounded on all three sides by the city of Los Angeles, and this is a view from the 10 freeway leaving Santa Monica and intersecting with the 405 freeway, two of the busiest freeways in the United States. So this is a daily occurrence in the afternoon when most people are leaving and going to work. My role has been primarily to lead the city's climate policy and climate adaptation, and so we see climate change impacts coming to Santa Monica. Although they may be mild relative to other parts of the community, they will still impact our residents in terms of quality of life, public health, and safety. We've had a long history of planning and policy making that has tried to reduce both vehicle miles traveled as well as improve air quality through reducing emissions through vehicles as well as reducing vehicle ownership. And so we have a series of plans that have preceded our current climate action and adaptation plan, all aimed at doing those kinds of things. Our most recent policy or document is the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, and that sets a goal to reduce the city's total carbon emissions 80% below 1990 levels by the year 2030. Our main areas in which we aim to do that is by achieving zero net carbon buildings, achieving zero waste, in which we are diverting at least 95% of our materials away from landfill, and then achieving sustainable mobility. And we define that by converting at least 50% of local trips to foot, bike, scooter, or skateboard, or converting 25% of trips of commuter trips to transit, and converting the remaining vehicles on the road to electric or zero emission vehicles. So I'm going to focus on the sustainable mobility aspect, obviously, for the purpose of this presentation. Santa Monica's emissions are primarily from the transportation sector, as can be seen by this graph, as well as was demonstrated by the image before. Buildings are our next largest source of emissions, both from electricity use and natural gas. But as in California and in the city of Santa Monica, we are transitioning more and more to a cleaner electricity grid. So the city's policies will soon be pivoting to address the use of natural gas in buildings, which will also impact indoor air quality as we try to reduce and eliminate use of combustion fuels in buildings. So this is a different view of the same emissions pie, but looking at fuel by source, gasoline and diesel fuel are our primary sources of emissions, and our primary climate actions to reduce those emissions are by increasing mobility options, by walking, biking, and transit, as well as increasing the use of electric vehicles. So I'll touch on these strategies, and I'll be speaking more at a tactical level. It was nice to have Prarthana give a high-level overview of what is being done at the strategic level, but these are going to be more examples of tactical solutions that the city has employed to try and reduce both vehicle miles traveled as well as to convert vehicles over to electric or zero emission. So the city of Santa Monica, just a few years ago in 2016, had welcomed the Expo light rail line. It connects Santa Monica all the way down to downtown Los Angeles. It's about a 9-mile light rail line, and I think I think the Southern California and Los Angeles in general has a stereotype image for people that we're mostly vehicular based, but it's such a large region that our transit systems are really challenged to cover such a wide swath of area, while people still expect the same level of service or the same speed to reach those large distances, when in reality, many other metropolitan cities in Europe or in other cities that have been primarily based around transit don't have to cover as large of a distance. But the metro has been a fairly significant game changer in Santa Monica. It brings many people across the city into Santa Monica, and so this is a complement to many of the other options that people have to arrive and leave in Santa Monica. As you can see in the far right-hand side, that's the iconic Santa Monica entrance to the pier, and it's a major destination tourist site. So in addition to large transit options, we do try and promote and provide individual options for people to get around. The city was one of the first communities in Southern California to launch a bike share program, and this program is continuing to evolve as there are newer options for people, particularly from the private sector. So on the right-hand side are electric scooters, and these scooters have proliferated significantly since over the past few years, some of which have really challenged transportation planners and city policymakers because these private companies are essentially overwhelming cities by leaving their scooters and also electric bikes throughout the community, leaving them for their users to use and manage. But as you can imagine, having such a decentralized system can create a lot of challenges. These scooters we have no way of really enforcing and ensuring safety when using them in terms of who gets to access them, how they get utilized, where they are used, and then when they are left and not used, making sure that they are keeping both the road and the sidewalks clear and safe for people who are already walking and need the sidewalks for access. So we're working on trying to work more closely with these companies and any other companies that may come into the mobility space, and trying to make sure that we have rules and regulations in place to make sure that there are mutual benefits to these programs being in Santa Monica. We try to make sure that also that we have spaces that feel safe for pedestrians and for bicyclists and for people on scooters, and making sure that we dedicate enough space for people to feel safe is important. In Southern California in general, this means that we're reclaiming a lot of space from vehicles. So roads that used to be multiple lanes dedicated to vehicles are now getting shrunken down to perhaps single lanes, and dedicated walking and biking infrastructure that is protected and separate is now being installed as a way to ensure that there is adequate space and adequate safety measures taken to ensure that people feel safe and are safe when they use this infrastructure. 2 years ago, the city of Santa Monica adopted an electric vehicle action plan. This is fairly unique for a city to do, but we felt it was important as we realized that most of our emissions come from vehicles. So what we have done is we've centralized all policy projects and programs that relate to electric vehicles into the Office of Sustainability. We coordinate all programs and projects out of our office there. There are also private companies that have cropped up and have offered low carbon and electric options. In the middle is a company called Free Ride. They offer short trips for free. They get their revenue from branding that's on the side of the vehicle. And so it's a great way for both tourists and locals to benefit from low carbon, small vehicles that can offer mobility options, and particularly first and last mile options. The next company on the right-hand side is called Wavecar. They also provide free access. They're like a car sharing company, but they offer free use of their vehicles and they benefit from the advertising space that they offer on the vehicle as well. In Santa Monica, through our electric vehicle action plan, we're seeking to expand the city's public charging infrastructure, trying to triple the number of charging connections in the next 2 years. So we started at just under 100 charging ports, and we're hoping to achieve 300 charging ports by the end of 2020. So all of this work has actually yielded some benefit that we can measure. We see that registered vehicles in Santa Monica have declined just by a modest 1.2%, but that is still significant. So if you're looking at the numbers in general, that's actually a decline of about just under 1,000 vehicles that are registered in Santa Monica. And I think that's demonstrative of the variety of options that people have to get around outside of owning their own vehicle. The vehicles that we see that are owned in Santa Monica, we see a growing percentage of alternative fuel vehicles, and we can see by comparing and contrasting to the larger county that that there is a higher uptake of these alternative fuel vehicles in Santa Monica. And so this is a metric that we will continually track and refer back to on an annual basis to see how well we are doing in shifting the vehicle mix over to cleaner vehicles. This is the count of charging stations that have gone into the city. These are private charging stations, so we are able to look at permits that get pulled in the city for people who want to install charging stations, and we can see that number, both the frequency and number of charging stations installed every year continues to go up. Similarly, on the fleet fuel side of the vehicle fleet that the city owns and operates, we are trying to decrease our use of fossil fuels. And we've seen some pretty significant success in converting a lot of our sedans over to electric vehicles. This month actually, we just recently rolled out the city's first battery electric bus that will start running service, and we'll see our bus fleet continue to convert over to electric over the years to come. One of the other things that we have been trying to do in small ways is to deploy more local air quality monitoring systems. These systems are fairly low cost, and they can be purchased privately, or recently we offered to buy a few and offer them to local residents, particularly in areas where there are sources of air quality issues, like our local airport or the freeway. And so we are able to look at this information and see what the real-time air quality is, and do much more longitudinal analysis and look at other particular incidents, whether there's local wildfires or whether there is increased fog or whether it's a high heat day. We can see those trends over time and see it at a much granular level than regional air quality data. This is just a high-level overview of how the various actions and policies in the city are serving the larger climate action and adaptation plan. Many of our programs and policies are in place, but we have many more pending and in the works right now. So with that, I'll say thank you. Again, I want to remind people that I'm now representing the County of Santa Barbara as a climate program manager. I can speak to some degree on the City of Santa Monica's policies and programs, but if you're looking to actively speak with someone directly in charge of those, I'd be more than happy to refer you in the future. But if you do want to get in touch with me, my email is there. If you want to see more about Santa Monica's sustainability programs, please visit the URL right there as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Garrett, for telling us Santa Monica's all the complements and also strategies to promote active mobility, public transport, and also clean vehicles such as electric vehicles. I've got a question for you. So as you presented earlier, like total registered vehicles dropped from 2016 to 2018. So I think it's also a common problem, like in the USA, like for instance, to convince car users to opt out of cars and also choose other environmentally friendly modes of transport? Have you encountered actually any resistance? And what was your communication strategy? So for instance, how do you persuade the commuters to use more often like public transport?
Yeah, well, it's no secret that mobility and congestion are primary issues, kind of in a political sense. And I think people feel like the trend has not declined or gotten better. People are resorting for, I think people are motivated by many different things, whether it's convenience or money or time. And so we try to balance all of those different motivating factors, and trying to make sure that people feel like whatever options they may have or whatever needs they have are met by a variety of options that they feel will meet their needs. So it's all voluntary. We don't necessarily require anyone to partake, but we do, as a city, try and incentivize city employees to take advantage of all of these options. We have incentives for people to use the bus, to use the metro system, to carpool, to bike. And those who are able and interested in taking those options do. But people, come from, many people travel long distances to work in Santa Monica. So unfortunately, it's not an option for everyone. And so we just try and make sure that there are as many options as possible for every user type.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Garrett. So I just want to flag here, if anyone else has any questions, please also address them in the chat box, and also please indicate who the question should be addressed to. And then I will introduce our next speaker, Camilla. So Camilla is the director of Goldstein Ween Architects, where as an architect and also urban designer, she focuses on sustainable cities and also transportation. Many of you might be familiar with Camilla's work. She works at the intersection of city design and also transport, and her work focuses on finding opportunities to expand transport briefs to include social inclusion, biodiversity, climate change mitigation, and also promotion of active mobility and improving the urban environment. So Camilla, thanks for joining us. The floor is yours.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Garrett and Prarthana. It's always so exciting to hear that there's so much progressive work going on all around the world. You tend to get stuck in your own little box, and it's just really exciting to hear. And it's interesting to see that we're all doing things very differently. So I think that's fabulous, because it just means there are more opportunities to try different things. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing in London mainly, and I'm going to embellish that with some examples from Europe. There are a lot of really good things that have been going on in Europe. And I think there might be one other that's from outside of Europe, which is from Mexico, but you'll see that when I get to it. So let me just see if I can advance this thing now. Yes, here we are. So here in London, I think the one thing that we feel is that you've got to understand what you're trying to do. So you've got to understand where the pollutants are coming from, and to know the percentage perhaps that comes from different types of vehicles when you're dealing with transport, for example, because there's so many different kinds of vehicles, public transport vehicles, personal vehicles, and so on, and some of them pollute more than others. So having that sort of understanding has got to be your starting point. But basically in London, we have been tackling the sort of air quality issue in two ways. And one is to tackle vehicle emissions. So these are transport problems.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Camilla. Probably can you make it full screen, your presentation?
I thought I did, but it didn't register. There we go. Now it's full screen. I apologize about that. Yes, so it's a two-pronged attack. One is tackling emissions from vehicles themselves, so the quality of the emission, if you like, and the other prong is to actually reduce vehicle trips altogether, assuming that we're never going to get to zero clean vehicles Obviously, if they were all clean, we could have those trips. But if we have to assume that even if you clean up some of the vehicles, you're not going to be able to clean up all of them. So it's a sort of two-pronged attack. So the first one, tackling the vehicle emissions, we're doing that in two ways. One is to enforce cleaner vehicles, which is started with the low emission zone in London, and then now more recently this year, the ultra low emission zone, which is just central London, and I'll explain that a bit more. And the other prong is obviously reducing the number of vehicles, and particularly trying to make people understand what is an essential journey and what maybe is a non-essential journey. So to just generally cut down on journeys overall. So talk about the ultra low emission zone. This came into force in April this year. It sets a very, very high standard for emissions that vehicles are allowed to emit within this zone, which is just really central London. I'm not sure exactly how big it is, but my guess is it's somewhere between maybe 6, 8, or 10 square miles. So it's quite a small part of London as a whole. And it builds on a previous scheme, which is still running for the whole of London, which is the low emission zone, which says to come into London at all, you've got to have a certain standard of vehicle, or you have to pay very heavily to actually be allowed to come in if you've got an old and very polluting vehicle. So this is the zone that's covered. So if you know London, you'll know this is the sort of central district. It's not all of the commercial district, because the commercial district now is the City of London and Canary Wharf. Canary Wharf is outside. So it's a small zone, but and it's well defined in that it has sort of from about the 1960s virtually a ring road system, so that if you were driving into London, you weren't familiar with London, even though the signs would tell you all about that you're entering zones that you're going to be charged for if you don't comply, you always have an option if you hit the zone to basically turn left or right so that you don't go into it and get charged inadvertently. So it started in April, as I said, this year, and it operates 24 hours, 7/7. So it's continuous. And it's relatively expensive if you are non-compliant. So older vehicles will have to pay £12.50, and heavy goods vehicles paying up to £100. So it's quite punitive. So the aim is really to force owners, both of vehicle fleets and personal vehicles, to upgrade their cars, to get rid of old cars that are very heavily polluting, and come up with and we are now operating, I think it's a Euro 6 standard, which is a fairly high standard of cleanliness in terms of pollutants. And the proposal is eventually to expand it in 2021, but as yet those proposals haven't come forward. So because it's relatively new, we don't have a lot of statistics. So this is more circumstantial, but the expectation was that it would reduce pollution within this zone by 45%. And interestingly, talking to people beforehand, it was very clear that 82% were actually willing to change or considering changing or had already changed the way they travel. So just the mere fact that it was coming was incentivizing people to think about and make better decisions about how they travel. And in fact, the really interesting thing is that only 8% of all those that were interviewed even thought it was a negative thing, even though it's quite punitive and expensive, you know, if you don't comply. And the one thing that also came out very clearly was that a lot of particularly scooter and moped riders were very keen to switch to low emission versions, electric versions, clean versions generally. So even before it started, the public were beginning to be aware of the fact that, you know, they have to think about the impact of their vehicles. So then reducing vehicle numbers. Now we have a number of different ways that we do this here in London. And the first one was the congestion charge scheme, which I'll describe. The other one is about behavior change and mode shift, so getting people to move away from using cars. A very heavy emphasis on walking, cycling, and the use of public transport. And then travel demand management, which is very much about people helping people to travel differently, and that's usually with communities or with big employers. So the congestion charge scheme, which actually is old now, it was started in 2003. It was a pioneer then very early on of then Mayor Ken Livingston, and everybody was really prepared that it was going to be a complete disaster, but it wasn't. But it still operates as then from 7 in the morning till 6 in the evening. So during work hours, and it's only Monday to Friday, so Saturday and Sunday you can come in. It costs £11.50 during the days it's operating, but actually it's free on weekends. And it works on just a very simple number recognition system. So there are loads of cameras around the whole zone. You will most likely be picked up several times. This goes to a central database that will check whether you have paid, and if you haven't, I think now, initially you got a fine immediately. I think now you're given 24 hours grace, but you have to pay or you incur heavy fines. And it's been actually, it was very successful initially. So the impact report right after it had been introduced was that traffic fell by 15%, which actually equated to a 30% improvement in journey time. And that's the complexity of how highways operate. When they're operating at capacity, they're very inefficient. But if there's spare capacity, they operate very efficiently. But there was also very marked improvement in air quality. And there were also other benefits like reduction of accidents. I mean, the really interesting thing that the ambulance service reported that there was a much higher rate of survival of cardiac arrests because they could get people to hospital very quickly. And the public generally who were opposed of it before it came, they said, oh, it's going to displace all the traffic all around, but that didn't actually happen. So it's been a very positive experience. I would say that since it was introduced, obviously things have changed. There was a period when there were a lot of road work, so that there was more congestion going on because of roads being taken out of action. There are more vehicles, and then the cost differential of, you know, how expensive it is. You know, the longer the fixed price has been in, it appears people get used to paying the price and are more willing perhaps to pay the price. So, you know, it's very clear that the pain of paying the price has to be evident to stop people from using the congestion charge zone or entering it. So the second thing is about mode shift, and this is very much about behavior. So getting people out of their cars, and I think there's sort of 3 strands to it. And one is the sort of heart, the head, and the purse. And the first one, the heart, is about the psychology, you know, a change of culture, but really understanding that, you know, we're in a new world and we have to behave differently. Then it's about information. So this is very much about providing people with information so they can make the best choices for what their journey is that they're going to take. And then making them aware of the efficiency. Well, it's kind of self-evident, but very often, you know, the journeys by car are incredibly slow, because even with the congestion charge and the improved, you know, flow of traffic on the highways, it's still pretty slow. There are lots of traffic lights, and the public transport will probably get you there much quicker, or a bicycle, or even often walking. So it's very much, you know, businesses are particularly aware of this, that if they can get from one meeting to another meeting in 20 minutes, as opposed to sitting in their own car and taking 2 hours, that's very positive for business. So on the heart side of things, the psychology, people need to understand what the impact is of them sitting in their car and using it. So it's about making that sort of understanding available to people, to bringing it into the dealing with climate change and environmental issues. It's about getting people to want to leave their cars behind, not just that it's a good thing, but that they really want to. So it's a difficult thing to get them right into the right place. But you have to make the clean alternatives available, you know, raise the profile of eco-mobility is huge. And the last point there, walking to school, a huge amount of our emissions are caused by massive traffic in the morning, parents taking their children to school by car. So what we don't have school buses on the whole here. Only a few of the private schools have school buses. So on the whole, kids are being bused or, you know, ferried to school in private cars by their parents. So the idea is to make it safe for children to walk to school, and there are lots and lots of programs getting groups of children to walk together, having an adult with them. They call them school walk buses, and helping them cross the roads, and having, you know, just generally making it acceptable to parents, because parents are the ones who make these decisions for their children, that the parents feel comfortable about their children walking to school. And then the head issue is about, you know, having this information. So, I mean, public transport has to be very easy to understand. It's got to be clear. The ticketing system needs to be clear and transferable from one mode to another, which it is in London. So that's very important. We have an Oyster card here, which is a simple smart card, which covers virtually every mode of traffic in London except for private taxis. But also online information, and this sort of blue and white screen on the right shows you that you can key in where you are, where you want to go, and it will tell you the best ways to get there, and it will tell you how long it will take by public transport, which underground or bus you need to take, if you want to take buses only, which buses you take, or if you want to walk or cycle, how long it's going to take, and you know how you do it. So that sort of information is hugely important. And the last point, real-time information. If you go to a bus stop where perhaps the frequency of buses isn't that frequent, you want to know when you get there. So there needs to be a machine there that tells you your bus is coming in 3 minutes or in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, because some people might decide to walk instead of waiting for the bus. But it's very frustrating when you wait and you wait and you wait and nothing happens. And then the final thing, the person, I mean, it's very clear, I touched on this earlier actually, but I mean, obviously, efficient movement, particularly for the workforce within London, is hugely important to the economy. But also there's an issue about pricing, and it is very important that the public transport and eco-mobility generally, and you have, even if you own your own bike or electric bike, you have to factor in, I suppose, depreciation, insurance and all that, but that actually making those choices has got to be cheaper than using a car. So people need to understand that, and if it's not, then people will still use their cars. Then the third thing is about promoting walking and cycling and public transport. So generally just promoting eco-mobility. And here the emphasis has been on providing infrastructure. So cycle lanes, good walking environments, and really good urban design that puts people before cars. And it's about reallocation of road space. And I put this slide in, I found this yesterday, it's on the internet. It's a classic car-centered street design, a little bit of space for the pedestrians, really nothing much for the cyclists at all. There's car parking on the streets. It's very much about the car. And I think in the future, we're thinking the street should be for people, which we allow cars into occasionally. So this was a design actually that our office did for outside a very, very busy metro station in central London, where there was so much traffic in the two directions. It's a crossroads, and people had to sort of run between the traffic lights, and they could get to one side, not the other. And the idea of paving the whole area was to say that this is actually the domain of people, and the cars can come through here cautiously and at risk, in a sense. They've got to be looking out for the pedestrians. So it's turning on its head the kind of how we view the street, no longer the street just for cars. And then it's about sort of making small places and little alleyways and passages attractive for people to walk. Now, this one on the left doesn't look that bad on a sunny day, but I can tell you on a dark evening in winter, it doesn't look very attractive. But with a little bit of effort, you could actually make it very attractive and make people walk that little bit further to get to the bus or to the public transport. And this one is interesting because this, again, it's just about sort of urban design. It's about improving how it feels. And instead of having all these damn signs that sort of are information for vehicles, you are stripping out most of that and allowing it to be a comfortable place for people to be in. This is a scheme that we did here in Battersea, near where we are, and it's actually a gap between an Islamic cultural center and a mosque. And on Friday prayers, it's actually heaving with people. And you can see in the old version, the very narrow pavement, people were standing in the street because they couldn't fit on the pavement. So the idea was to widen the pavement to create a place actually where people could stand. It's a dead-end road, the one that's straight ahead anyway, so only a few cars are going to come in and out occasionally. That those cars have got to understand they're coming into a pedestrian realm. Then there are other tools for getting people to walk further and just walk in general rather than always hopping on a bus or on the underground, and that's about wayfinding. So this scheme, which is called Legible London, was introduced, gosh, about 12, 15 years ago, a long time ago. And it's basically a series of maps. You have these totems all around the city, and you pretty much look, when you look at the map, it's the way you would hold the map in the direction you're looking, so that it's always facing the right way. You don't have north at the top, you have the direction of view, and it will tell you where the key things are in the neighborhood and how far. It has a circle on it that says sort of 5 minutes or 10 minutes walk, and it helps you to sort of figure out how to walk. And then there are little totems around at crossroads that tell you where to go. And I mentioned about sort of stripping out just superfluous infrastructure full of, you know, street lights and all of that. And the one on the left is actually on a designated cycle route. So you're supposed to go down that road, but everything about the signals were telling people actually don't enter. So we said, well, let's actually redesign that junction. It's a very busy junction. It's a very busy road. And cyclists need to get to either side of the other road, but they're grouped together in the small little side roads. So, you know, it's addressing the desire lines of the users rather than always thinking about the cars. And then just a few examples from Europe about making cycling more attractive. Utrecht station has put in, it will have eventually 22,000 cycle parking spaces and a further 11,000 sort of in the surrounding area. So masses and masses of parking. And Utrecht station is right in the middle of the Netherlands, and it has railway stations going, I mean, railway lines going to almost every part of Holland. But so the important part of it is that by putting in all this infrastructure for cyclists, it's encouraging people to cycle from their homes to come and commute by train. So you can actually ride your bike into the building, and they're on several floors. It's very accessible, it's clean, and it's safe, and it's easy to take out your bikes and lock up your bikes. And this is a scheme in Denmark where Copenhagen has, the picture in the middle shows an absolutely amazing network of cycleways, but what happens is that there are a lot of waterways and other barriers for the cyclists to get over. Sometimes they're highways, sometimes they're waterways. And so what they have done is actually looked at all the barriers to cycling from a short distance from one side of a piece of water to another by putting in dedicated cycle and walking lanes. And they're also putting in bridges, cycle and walking bridges across the water so that people can easily get to where they want and in a direct manner. And another way of promoting cycling is actually that so many people in London say, well, I couldn't possibly cycle because I have nowhere to keep my bike. I'm not allowed to bring it into the building where I live. I share it with several people. I live in an apartment block. So these little things which take up the space of one car, and they take 8 bikes, and the people who are registered will have a sort of automatic key so they can put their thing in. It's a roll top. You just put your bike in and it's safe. And this was a project that actually we did in Mexico City. And the interesting thing about it is that this was a place where there was a commuter rail. The 2 red lines were sort of BRT routes, very busy. You couldn't get off the BRT stations and get into the station without a really complicated detour. And the 2 communities either side were completely separated from each other. And bang in the middle was a hospital, which actually was so inaccessible that people only drove to it, even though people could very easily walk if the infrastructure was there, and nobody could get to the park if they were on the wrong side of the tracks. So our solution was to actually put in a walk and cycle link that went across all the infrastructure so that everything was integrated, and we created a sort of central plaza in the middle outside the hospital, And the idea was therefore that however you arrive, be it by BRT or by the commuter rail or by just walking and cycling, you'd be able to get to the hospital. And the other thing is about public transport is it's got to be attractive. So it's got to look nice, it's got to feel nice, and it's got to be a pleasurable experience. And then travel demand management is a more complicated thing, and it's an expensive thing, but Transport for London have worked with local communities, and they've got volunteers from local communities to sort of say, okay, particularly in outer areas of London where the transport connections aren't quite so good, and working with them and saying, well, how are you traveling? What are the alternatives? What would you need if you perhaps, you know, wanted to use public transport? How would that work for you? And then devising sort of plans for these people. And the really interesting thing was that when they worked with people and people were made aware of their alternatives to just getting in the car and driving to where they normally go, was that they were terribly excited to discover that actually the public transport network with the perhaps addition of bicycles and so on did work for them. And I think the very important thing is that when you're talking about behavior change, it mustn't feel like punishment, but it must feel like you've got to have a feel-good feeling that you're doing something for the environment. So all the benefits really do need to be clear. And this I put in because I think you can all have a look. I put a link there to a video. Oslo City was dogged with traffic jams in the center because it's around the end of a fjord. So all the traffic had to go through the center to go in one side and out the other. So it was an absolutely impossible situation, poor air quality, but just log jam of traffic and everything else. So they said, right, we're going to be car free by 2019 in the city center. And the focus is on walking, cycling and public transport. And also making nice places. So instead of like this picture at the top shows in 2009 where it was all tarmac and everything was for the car, to making it a place for people. And so you can have a look. It's about, I think, a 20-minute video, but it's really worth looking because they interview all the different people who were involved in promoting the different modes and making what they needed to do in terms of enhancing the infrastructure, both for walking and cycling and for public transport. And the cycling is interesting because Norway is very far north, has a lot of snow in the winter, but people do actually ride their bikes even in the winter. So it's an interesting thing. So I would say the summary is, you know, you've got to tackle the vehicles, you've got to reduce the vehicles, and you've got to promote eco-mobility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Camilla. This is really particularly interesting to see how London takes a number of actions to address vehicle-related air pollution, including the new ultra-low emission and also low emission zones, investments in walking and cycling, etc. And also, apart from the infrastructure, what is extremely important is also the behavioral change that you mentioned. Because when we talk about eco-mobility, it's about changing people's mindsets and also make it more appealing and attractive. And then people will automatically opt for low emission modes of transport. So I've got a lot of interesting questions coming in. Camilla, probably one question for you first. So how does the congestion pricing affect the low-income drivers, and how the impact and mitigate it or offset, based on probably your experience in London?
Well, I mean, that was one of the key arguments for not doing it, but the reality was that probably it was higher income drivers who were using and driving through central London who can afford to drive a car. So I think very much already London was quite dependent on public transport for lower income people. It wasn't very attractive, and the information, particularly regarding which buses to use and so on, was very poor. So, you know, but I think the lower income thing just doesn't come in. There are people who are exempted. So if you are disabled, if you have a disability badge on your car, you're exempted. All the ambulance and emergency vehicles are exempted. So there's a whole bunch of vehicles and categories that are exempted who are seen as kind of essential users. but it's the non-essential users, I think, that are really being targeted.
Right. Of course, that's very interesting. And I've got another question for you, Camilla, from Mina. And what are the best measures for traffic calming? Probably also based on the experience in London and also European cities.
Yeah, I mean, traffic calming is, I mean, we in London, a lot of the local authorities are now introducing 20-mile-an-hour zones. So we're going down from 30 to 20 on the majority of roads, not everywhere, but I mean, the feeling is very much, and I'm part of a group called Living Streets, and we advocate that really all streets ideally should be 20 miles an hour unless they're trunk roads, like places where people can't actually get on. You know, so you'd have to cross them on an overbridge, but you can't walk across the traffic. But anywhere where people and traffic mingle, we say 20-mile-an-hour zone. Other things I think are about, you know, with side streets, if you have the raised cushion so that the pavements are continuous and the cars have to ride over a bump, that tends to slow them down. It's all about creating signals to the drivers to say, look, this is the domain of people. You be careful. So that it's a lot is about surfaces, and it's about tightening up the exit roads where roads cross and so on. And then, of course, you know, traffic lights and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Camilla. And probably I have a question for Prarthana. So, like you mentioned in your presentation, the Clean Air Scorecard tool. So it's like you mentioned, it's important to look at the baseline where you also need to integrate, for instance, like all the traffic data, etc., to put it into a more holistic approach. So, for instance, for other cities to replicate and all scale up or apply the tool, what do you think is like important for the cities?
So, so thanks for the question. So basically, the tool is available. It's an online tool, and it's not. It's you know, it's available for anyone who wants to use it. And I think the challenge is, I mean, it's for cities which do not have plans at the moment or are still groping with, you know, assessing air quality management status. I mean, obviously the work that is being done in London and Santa Monica is much advanced, and our work is primarily focused on Asian cities, which at the moment is groping for air quality solutions. So I think the use of the tool is essential for cities which want to explore which direction they need to go to, and look at how you can, you know, develop your air quality management policy, which includes your transport and mobility plan. So so it's something that can be used by any city which wants to work on clean air action.
Right. Yeah. So, like as you mentioned, it's important to also include the air quality plan into the overall development plan, so that cities can have a goal to, and also step-by-step instructions to reach the goal. Then I have another question, probably for Garrett. So it's very interestingly clear that the electrification of transport modes that will have a major role to play in reducing GHG emissions, and also particular matter from the transport sector, as you have a lot of experience in developing the electric vehicle action plans while working for Santa Monica. So for instance, for a city, if they in a developing country, they would like to take up electrification, what would be the enabling policies probably, and also how, for instance, the public sector and also private sector could work together?
Sure. I think one of the starting places is to recognize how that electric vehicle charging is very complex, and it transects a lot of different functions of facilities, parking operations, property management, and employee engagement, and even your police force if you're enforcing parking or charging regulations, your finance department for, you know, you're creating wholly new enterprise for charging for fee, for use of electricity for fuel, and then policy. So there's lots of different stakeholders that have to be involved when it comes to strategically planning for building out a comprehensive network. And a lot of jurisdictions have largely gone about this kind of in an ad hoc fashion, just putting a few token charging stations here and there, particularly when there's a new construction project. But as we're going out and trying to install charging stations in existing facilities, facilities that weren't prepared for electric vehicle charging, we're finding that there are a lot of challenges. We're disrupting people's existing understanding and comfort with, who is able to park where. So there's some cultural aspect to that as well. But I think it's really important to at least identify the right people and stakeholders across all those different functions, and making sure that they are at least supportive or can help you figure out how to navigate all of those different aspects. Because otherwise, we're only going to see very mild approach if we continue to kind of do this ad hoc approach and not do it in a way that's strategic and comprehensive.
Great. Thank you very much. So for the audience, if you have any questions, please also address them in the chat box again. And probably I have another question for Camilla. So as you mentioned, like the ultra low emission zone in London, it is one of the many actions that London is taking to clean up London's air. So I wonder if there are any complementary measures also to support that. For instance, for the residents that are living like in the zone or who are affected, they need to also comply with the vehicle emission standards. So are there any other support from the government to support the ultra low emission zone?
Well, not financial support, no. The support is mainly around information. So there's been a long term leading up to it about providing information. I think all car owners were actually received a letter to say they should check whether their vehicle is compliant or not. The incentive to get rid of that car was the fact that it's going to be very expensive to carry on keeping it and using it in the city. So, but no, I mean, I think, some felt a bit put out initially, but I think there was also a lot of information campaign to explain why it was essential. So the statistics about how many people were suffering from respiratory problems and early deaths, and the number of deaths attributed to poor air quality in London is massive. I mean, it's something over 10,000 a year. It's very high. So all of this information was being generally made available to people. So I personally haven't even come across anybody who's gone, ape about the fact that they had to either get rid of their car or it's going to be expensive for them. I think people are accepting that we need to change.
Okay, thank you very much, Camilla. So now we know that the local and the region, there are a lot of local and regional air quality management plans, which include initiatives like what Camilla mentioned, like low emission zones in cities or congestion charges. And also there are a lot of legal mechanisms that are used to address air quality. So as we can see, the climate change battle rages on. It is imperative that cities catalyze their process through forward planning and also sound implementation. And as also, for instance, Prarthana mentioned, it's important to have this communication with stakeholders and institutional collaboration, and also to engage the public actively. As time is drawing close, I would like to thank you for a very interesting presentation and also discussion. And we appreciate all the participants who have been interacting with our panelists. So we will address further questions in a follow-up email with all the links to all resources mentioned during the webinar, and also the recording of the webinar will be available in a few days. Besides, you can also follow our project on the CitiesSHIFT webpage, which is www.ecomobility.org/CitiesSHIFT. And please don't hesitate to contact our team if you have any questions or suggestions. So thank you again, Prarthana, Garrett, and Camilla for being our panelists today. Thank you everyone for joining us, and please stay tuned for our next webinar. Thank you.